A newly appointed police chief walks into his own precinct undercover, determined to see his officers for who they truly are, without the masks they wear when authority is watching. But when a white officer spits in his face, assuming he's just another nobody, the atmosphere shifts. The room is only seconds away from a revelation so powerful, it will shake everyone to their core. It was a humid Tuesday morning in August when Richard Nelson, the freshly sworn-in chief of police, stepped out of his car in Blue Ridge, a quiet town nestled in the rolling hills of North Carolina. Clad in a faded plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and scuffed sneakers, he looked nothing like a man in charge. He had spent over 20 years climbing the ranks in law enforcement, and his unassuming appearance was no accident. Richard Nelson believed in seeing the truth, not the performance. He wasn't interested in polished presentations, scripted welcomes, or token gestures. As a black man stepping into a leadership role in a department dogged by rumors of misconduct, he knew he had to witness the culture as it truly was, raw and unfiltered. And the best way to do that was to blend in. The precinct's parking lot buzzed with movement, officers coming and going, chatting casually. Richard took it all in, quietly observing the energy and body language, noting the occasional glance in his direction. No one recognized him, which was expected. His appointment had only been announced a few days earlier, and he had intentionally kept his official arrival quiet until the scheduled inspection later that morning. He adjusted the brim of his baseball cap and drew a deep breath. The burden of his task, to uncover and confront the rot festering within the department, settled heavily on his shoulders. He was no stranger to adversity, but he sensed this role would challenge him in ways he hadn't yet faced. As he made his way toward the building, the distant sound of laughter floated through the thick August air. Richard slipped through the precinct's side entrance, unnoticed. Inside, the steady hum of chatter and ringing phones filled the air. Fluorescent lights gleamed off spotless tiled floors, and the lingering scent of stale coffee clung to the space. He moved slowly, absorbing every detail. Officers clustered near desks, some trading stories, others lost in paperwork. No one gave him a second look. That changed when he stopped near the break room. "Hey, you!" A sharp voice pierced the noise. Richard turned to see a white officer approaching with a cocky stride and a smug grin stretched across his face. The officer's badge read Daniels. Behind him, a few others leaned casually against the wall, their eyes locked on the unfolding scene, eager for entertainment. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but Daniels cut him off before he could get a word out. "Lost, are we?" "This isn't a shelter," Daniels sneered, his voice thick with condescension. "You need to take that mess somewhere else." The words struck Richard like a blow. He stood still, uncertain whether to reveal himself or allow the situation to unravel a bit further. But before he could decide, Daniels stepped in closer, raising his voice so the others could hear. "Didn't you hear me? Get out of here. We don't need people like you hanging around." Laughter erupted from the onlookers. Richard's jaw tightened. His heart pounded, but he remained silent, trying to form a measured response. Daniels leaned in, his face now just inches away, and then without warning he spit directly into Richard's face. Time froze. Richard's breath caught as warm saliva slid down his cheek. The room filled with cruel laughter. One officer slapped a table, doubled over with amusement. Another muttered something under his breath about putting the riffraff in their place. Richard's thoughts raced. His ears rang with adrenaline, but he kept control. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, retrieved a handkerchief, and wiped his face with deliberate calm. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" he asked, his voice low but steady, the weight of his authority hidden just beneath the surface. Daniels smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong here." The group roared with laughter once more, but Richard didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, heading down the hallway in silence, leaving the stunned officers behind. As he approached the precinct's main office, the intercom crackled overhead. All personnel to the briefing room. It was time. The tea. Briefing room buzzed with casual conversation as officers trickled in, some clutching coffee mugs, others sharing laughs over inside jokes. Richard slipped in through a side door, now holding a folder stamped with the precinct's official seal. He remained just out of view, quietly observing the room as it filled with familiar faces. A few officers were still chuckling, clearly reliving the earlier incident. At the front of the room, Captain Harris, a stocky man with a graying mustache, called for attention. "All right, settle down, everyone. We've got an important introduction today." The chatter faded as curiosity took hold. Daniels leaned casually against the wall, arms folded, still wearing that smug grin. He looked like a man proud of how his morning was going. Captain Harris cleared his throat. "As most of you know, Chief Caldwell retired last month. We've been waiting on his replacement, and today I'm proud to introduce our new chief, a man with a distinguished record and a strong vision for this department." At that moment, Richard stepped forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The room fell into stunned silence as he approached the podium. His calm, steady presence demanded attention. He set the folder on the lectern, then paused, letting his eyes travel across the room. Daniels's smirk faltered. His face drained of color as realization hit. Around him, officers glanced at one another, whispering nervously, eyes fixed on the man they had just dismissed and mocked. "Good morning," Richard began, his voice composed and resolute. "My name is Richard Nelson, and as of today, I am your new chief of police." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Daniels turned a deep shade of red, his earlier confidence crumbling. Richard's gaze lingered on him for a long, loaded second before sweeping across the rest of the room. "When I arrived this morning," he continued, "I came in plain clothes for one reason. I wanted to see this department for what it truly is. I came here to see this department through an unfiltered lens," Richard continued. "And what I witnessed was eye-opening." A murmur swept through the room, but Richard raised a hand, silencing it with calm authority. "In the short time I've been here, I've already observed behavior that is not only unprofessional, but completely unacceptable. Let me be absolutely clear. The toxic culture that has been allowed to grow within these walls ends today." A heavy silence fell over the room, his words hitting like a hammer. Daniels shifted where he stood, suddenly finding the floor more interesting than anything else. Richard stepped closer to the edge of the podium, his voice firm but controlled. "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of everything we do in law enforcement. Without it, we don't just fail each other. We fail the community we swore to protect." He let the moment hang, eyes scanning the room. Many officers squirmed under his gaze. "This morning, some of you laughed, thinking you were watching a powerless man being put in his place. But let me remind you, every single person who walks through these doors deserves dignity and respect, badge or not." His words sliced through the tension like a blade. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Richard stood tall, letting the silence do its work. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort and realization. Daniels shifted again, sweat now beading along his forehead. But Richard wasn't finished. "I know change is never easy," he said, his tone steady, carrying the weight of authority. "But hear me now. There will be zero tolerance for conduct that disrespects the humanity of any individual, whether they're a fellow officer, a civilian, or anyone else." He stepped down from the podium and began walking slowly toward the gathered officers. Each step echoed with quiet power. His presence filled the room, and not a single soul could look away. Yet even as Richard spoke with measured control, his words carried a quiet, unmistakable intensity. "Officer Daniels," he said, stopping just a few feet from the man. Daniels visibly flinched, the arrogance he'd worn earlier now gone. His confidence had completely crumbled. You, Richard continued, locking eyes with him, are the embodiment of everything that's broken in this department. When you spat in my face, it wasn't just me you disrespected. It was the badge, the oath we took, and the community we're sworn to protect. Daniels stammered. Chief, I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, Richard cut in, his voice sharp and unyielding. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You didn't stop to think. You didn't ask. You just assumed the man standing in front of you didn't matter. He let those words hang heavy. And that assumption, the belief that some people matter less, is precisely why this department has lost the trust of the very people it's supposed to serve. The room was deathly silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Richard turned his gaze to the rest of the room, scanning the stunned faces. What I witnessed today wasn't just one officer's failure. It was a reflection of a deeper, rotting culture. One where bullying and prejudice aren't just allowed, they're encouraged. That ends now. He stepped back toward the podium, his voice gaining strength. I've spent my career fighting for justice, not just on the streets, but within the walls of institutions like this one. I know change is hard, and I know it won't happen overnight. He paused, looking every officer in the eye. But hear me when I say this. As long as I am your chief, this precinct will operate with integrity, respect, and accountability. The room hung on his every word. Then, with a nod to Captain Harris, Richard delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended, pending a full internal investigation. And for anyone here who thinks this is just a slap on the wrist, think again. This is only the beginning. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's face flushed a deep crimson. His jaw clenched tightly as he avoided the gaze of his fellow officers. Richard, calm and composed, remained standing tall. This isn't about punishment, he said firmly. It's about setting a standard. And if you're not willing to meet that standard, then this isn't the place for you. He swept his eyes across the room one final time, locking eyes with each officer. If you're ready to do better, to be better, then we move forward together. But understand this, I will hold each of you accountable, every step of the way. The meeting ended in heavy silence. The usual chatter was gone as the officers quietly filed out, weighed down by the gravity of what had just taken place. Richard stayed behind at the podium, watching as Daniels stormed out, his face twisted in a mix of humiliation and anger. Around him, the other officers kept their heads down, their expressions ranging from guilt to quiet reflection. Later, back in his office, Richard lowered himself into his chair and let out a slow, deep breath. He knew this was only the beginning. Years of entrenched behavior wouldn't vanish overnight, and for some it never would. But he hadn't come to Blue Ridge to be liked. He came to bring change. The phone on his desk rang. It was Captain Harris. Chief, I just wanted to say, you handled that better than most would have, Harris said, his tone cautious but sincere. Thanks, Captain, Richard replied. But the real work starts now. I want a complete review of Daniel's record on my desk by tomorrow. Complaints, incident reports, everything. You got it, Harris answered. He paused, then added, And, Chief, I think you shook a few of them today, in a good way. Richard ended the call and sat back, allowing himself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. Then, without delay, he turned to the stack of paperwork before him, ready to get to work. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at the precinct began to shift. The same officers who once laughed along with Daniels now kept their distance, the news of his suspension spreading quietly but firmly throughout the department. Richard made it a priority to be a visible presence, walking the halls regularly and greeting each person he passed. His steady presence served as a constant reminder that things had changed and that leadership was watching. Some officers responded with genuine reflection. One afternoon, Officer Reyes, a young recruit, approached him hesitantly. "I've been part of the problem," she admitted. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid of retaliation. But I want to do better, Chief." "That's all I ask," Richard replied, his voice steady and sincere. "It starts with you." But not everyone was ready to embrace the new direction. Daniels filed an appeal, claiming his suspension was unjust. Richard didn't flinch. He stood by his decision, grounded in the principle that accountability was not up for debate. The internal review revealed a troubling history. Multiple complaints against Daniels, including incidents of excessive force and inappropriate behavior. His appeal was denied. Richard used the moment to send a clear message. The era of ignoring misconduct was over. Despite the progress, Richard knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Efforts to spark conversations around implicit bias and community engagement received mixed reactions. Some embraced the change, others resisted it. Still, Richard pressed on. Every small breakthrough, a recruit finding their voice, an officer reevaluating their behavior, was a step in the right direction. One morning, at a local community event, Richard knelt down to speak with a young boy who had shyly approached. "Him? Are you really the chief?" the boy asked, eyes wide with curiosity. "I am," Richard said warmly, offering a smile. "I can't change the past, but I promise we're working to do better," he said gently. "And if you ever need help, you come find me." "Okay," the boy nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. It was moments like this that reminded Richard why he had taken the job in the first place. By the end of his first year, the precinct was far from perfect. But it was undeniably different. Officers who couldn't adapt were gone, replaced by recruits who shared Richard's vision for a fair and respectful department. Community, once skeptical, began to see signs of change, a renewed effort to build trust and bridge divides. Richard stood in the precinct's main hallway one evening, watching as officers filed out after their shifts. The laughter and camaraderie felt different. Now, not at someone's expense, but genuine and inclusive. He knew there would always be challenges ahead. But for the first time, he felt hopeful. Change was never easy, but it was worth every fight.